Hello everybody, I'm back and we're ready for another watercolor demo. Today we're going to do some snow-covered trees. Now if you're an acrylic painter, an oil painter, that's really not too difficult, but if you're doing it in watercolor, it does pose some different problems. So that's what I wanted to approach today, because I know that many of you are probably doing a lot of cards and things like that for Christmas. So this might be really helpful to you. And so we'll just jump right in. All right, so this is our reference picture, and this is just a typical tree. So we've got, it's actually a very small tree. I didn't want to do a really huge one, but we have basically this snow is almost covering the tree completely. Of course, you have these little bits of the tree peeking out. But how do you make that convincing? I mean, you could just leave the white of the paper, and that's fine, but it does need a little bit more. Then we have another issue. What if the lighting were different? So, for example, oops, wrong one, hang on. If we were to look at this example here, this one has light behind it. So we're now looking at the shadow side of the tree. So the shadow side of the snow is actually darker than what's behind it. So two different ways of approaching a tree. So we'll come back to this one in a minute. But right now we're going to just focus on this one. Now the thing that I really want to emphasize here is the shape of the snow that is sitting on the branches. So if I were to take my pencil and to outline these shapes, you can see that they are almost coral shaped in some ways. I guess you might say that. But I'm looking at that shape, and then I'm looking at this shape here for this branch, and it almost looks like it's dripping or melting. So it has to basically follow each branch. There's a buildup of snow on each branch, basically, is what it boils down to. So I'm going to approach my tree in that way. And you may think, well, you paint the tree and then you add the snow on top. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually paint the blobs of snow before I paint the tree. So, but I want to keep in mind these shapes here. If I used a marker, it would probably show up even better. Oh, that's a big fat one. I don't want a big fat one. But if I used a marker to mark this, I don't know how well that's showing up, but basically I'm looking at these kinds of shapes here, that type of thing, and this type of thing. Now, trees are very organic, so of course, as you are working on your tree, if there are slight differences, I would not get too worried about it. They're very organic. Every tree is a little bit different, so don't try to follow this to the letter, every single branch, exactly the way you see it in the photograph. That's when I think you become a little bit too married, I guess, to your reference picture. So it's much better, I think, to just sort of work a little bit more naturally. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to try to replicate some shapes like this where I want to place my tree. All right, so let me just set this here as I work, and I'll probably move my tree over a little bit. It's a little bit off to the side in this picture, so I'll move it over just a little bit. Let's say I want to fit my tree into this shape here. So I basically outlined where my shape is here. I did it very lightly because I'm working on watercolor paper and I really don't want to mess it up. But the one thing you're really going to notice too is that there are large shapes and small shapes. Don't make them all the same. I want to get a few of these larger ones at the bottom put in first, because they are kind of key players, I guess. And these shapes feel really weird when you're drawing them out. It just feels like, oh my gosh, these are really strange. But in the end, this all comes together and it does make some sense. So it's not just a matter of leaving those areas white. We're going to be doing a little bit more here, but I wanted to make sure that I get at least the feeling that those branches are sort of weighted down by the snow, that they are large. And I'm basically putting the large ones in first because the large ones, like the small ones, I can fit in between. I can't fit the big ones in between small ones as easily. So working with the big ones first, the big shapes, and then I work my way down to the smaller shapes. There's some branches that sort of stick out to the side, and we'll get some of those. Maybe put in a little branch here. I've actually done this one as a large painting, but we're going to just do a mini version today. So and as I said, we're not trying to duplicate the photo to a T or anything like that. We're just trying to get the general shape. And by the way, if you have any questions for me, I would really appreciate it if you'd put them in capitals, because I can spot that on my screen a lot faster than all the typing being the same size. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, any of your questions. Let's talk about what materials I'm using here. I'm using Arch's 140-pound cold press paper. Let's just put a small one up there. And I'm not using a fancy pencil here. This is just an HB pencil from, let's see, it's from Robson Secondary School, Robron Secondary School. I have no idea where I got that. So, all right, let's just about done here. Now there's a few that are sort of tucked in between. They're tucked underneath, but those ones count too, so I need to put those on as well. So let's put a few kind of hiding back underneath the overhanging branches here. All right, that's good enough. So I've basically got my composition for my snow mounds. I'm not too worried about my background at this stage, but I just want to, I want to get mostly to the, I guess I'm going to put my phone on silence here, but I want to get to the main part of the tree here. So let's put one out there. The tree looks a little unbalanced, so I'm just going to put a little bit more out here because I'm an artist and I can do that. All right, so put a few little extra blobs there. Hopefully you can see that. I think it's showing up on my screen, so hopefully you can see it. And now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually shape my my snow. Right, so rather than putting the tree underneath and everything first, I'm going to start off by giving my snow some form. So I don't want it to look like paper, like pieces of cut out paper that are stuck on my tree. I want it to look like they actually have some shape to them. So I'm going to take a little bit of cobalt blue here. Cobalt blue is always pretty good for snow, but that's an awfully bright blue, wouldn't you say? So I'm going to muddy it up a little bit with a little bit of, I could use burnt sienna. I'm reluctant to use burnt sienna only because it's very granulating, but just for speed, I'm going to use a little bit of that. So a little bit of burnt sienna mixed into my cobalt blue will tone that down and make it a little bit more, a little less vibrant. I think I accidentally went into my Quin Gold. All right, so there we go. So we've got a more toned down blue to work with here. Right, now you see how I mix it in? I put it to the side and then I mix in what I need, the amount that I need, little by little. And that way I don't go overboard and really sort of kill the color completely. So I've got a good sized puddle of this, and I'm going to start working on these blobs of snow, basically one at a time. I'm just going to draw a couple more in here just to do something like that. So these big ones first are a very important part. Now these ones underneath, remember I said that there's some that are tucked underneath? I'm going to shade those. So I'm going to come underneath these and put in a little bit of shadow on these ones. I'm obviously not being too neat about it, but I could probably work a little bit more carefully. I just really don't feel like I need to work. I know that there's greenery that's going in underneath. That's why I'm not as concerned about it. So if you were, not staying in your lines or something like that, don't get too bent out of shape about it, because that greenery is going to come in and it's going to help that a lot. Now we've made that, but I also want to give this some shape. So I want to come in and tuck in some more, a little bit more of this color here and there, so that I have a little bit of a shadow that looks like it's coming out. And currently that looks like it's far, far, far too dark, doesn't it? Be patient though, because we're seeing this color against white paper, which is very deceiving. It can make it feel like it's far too dark. But by the time those actual dark greenery come in, it's going to make that appear so much lighter. Don't forget, this is also going to dry lighter. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to tuck up, you see this blob here. I'm going to tuck up underneath there. And I'm going to come down, and I don't want to come down and meet where the previous color was, because of course that will bleed together, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to come close to it, and I'm going to rinse and blot my brush, and I just want to soften this lower edge here. So I'm going to soften this. All right, so that has already given this a little bit of form. So you might think, well, gosh, that's shouldn't that be lighter on the top and shaded on the side? Not necessarily, because you have to look at your reference picture. I showed you those two examples where the lighting was behind the tree and some was in front of the tree. So very often people will assume that the surface of the snow, like this snow here, you might assume that that is white. But what is surprising is that when you face a piece of paper to the sky, the sky color actually covers that surface. So what's facing up can often look darker than, say, a vertical area where you've got, the snow on the side. So the flat surface facing the sky might actually be a little bit darker than the side. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And as I go along here, I will probably change it, because remember also that the tree is kind of round. So the light may hit it a little bit differently. Now, as it happens, this was not a brilliantly sunny day. So we don't have that really strong light that you often would get after a snowfall. And I'm blotting my brush just to soften this as I go. But if you've got bright sunshine, then it makes it very, very obvious where the shadows are. So this is all going to feel like it's like way too dark, and that is pretty much par for the course. I'm doing it dark to really, I might even be doing it too dark, but I really wanted to emphasize that the snow you put on isn't necessarily as white as the white of the paper. So I'm blotting my brush to soften some edges. Just come along these lower edges here. Oh, I accidentally hit my branch in front, so I will just keep an eye on that. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to shade a lot of my snow here. So this one over here, this one's pretty much on the shadow side of the tree. Now, as I said, there's not a lot of like prominent sun in this case, but I would say that the sun is definitely coming from this side. I remember that it was coming from this side. So this side of the tree is going to get a lot more shadow than this side. So this branch here, for example, or this bit of snow here might end up being dark. And this one might end up being dark. And by doing this, not just with the tree, but with the snow itself, you are setting up the feeling that this tree is actually a spherical or cone-shaped object, that, you know, the light is hitting it differently in different places. Now, I can improvise, and I can, you know, add in a few little bits here and there if I want to, you know, sort of add in a few little things, and that's always kind of a nice addition. But you know, I can add in a little bit like that. So if you feel like you need a few more branches in there, you can go ahead and edit. But in the meantime, I'm going to just carry on. And I'm going to stay focused mostly on the right-hand side of the tree for the moment, just because I want to put my shadows in fairly consistently. All right, so coming in, this is, when I put down my color, I'm also putting it in wet enough that it's not already dry by the time I blot my brush. So if I rinse and blot my brush, that's still wet enough that I can move it. So, because one thing snow will always do is it builds up in very rounded mounds. It doesn't drop off like a straight angle or anything like that. Like, you know, it's rounded. Everything in the snow is rounded. It's like throwing a blanket over something. So some of these I'll probably have to wait until other areas are dry before I can come back to them, but I'm going to continue on here with some of this. And blot my brush. And yeah, you can, I mean, if you're just doing Christmas cards, you could potentially just leave the white of the paper. And you know what? It would look okay. It would look sort of graphic. It wouldn't look as realistic. But if you're looking for something a little bit more, with a little bit more realism, you might want to consider this approach. So I'm just going to come in with a few more blobs that I didn't have drawn on here, just because I got like kind of a real bald spot there, but and over here. Now we're getting to the top of the tree. So as we get to the top of the tree, of course, that's facing the sky, and we're going to see probably a little more light, like a little bit more, not as heavy as what's at the bottom. So come in here. And as I said, the light source is more from the left. So as I'm painting these in, I am keeping most of the shadow to the right. But so often, I mean, I've seen many people paint a tree, and then they'll be pulling out their white paint to paint the snow on it. And while there's nothing really wrong with that, it's just not going to give you the kind of result that's going to be convincing. So now, as I come in to do the blobs of snow on the left-hand side of the tree, I'm going to keep more of the shadow on the right side of every blob. So here we go. Come in, I'll do 2 at a time here. Don't do any more than you feel you can do and keep things wet, right? You need to keep these 2 colors wet in order for that to work. So most of the tree on the left side of all of these shapes, the left side is pretty much light. If I did decide to leave all of these edges hard, that would actually portray stronger sunshine. Sunshine, when it's really bright, will produce harder shadows. So you could get a pretty convincing looking shadow even if you didn't manage to soften your lines. So don't get too invested in softening every single line. I think it's important if you can get the shape, you know, if you can soften it and get that shape the way you want it, then that's great. But if there's a bit of hardness, I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker. Now this all feels a little bit weird as you're doing it. Admittedly, it does feel a little bit weird. But as we come in with some of the shadows, a lot of the tree, I should say, this is going to make more sense. So if each of these shapes has a line, like a pencil line on the left side, and don't go up to it with my color. I just only do the right side. Rinsing my brush and blotting. Don't forget that blot. That's extremely important. If you go in there with a wet color, you just fill in the shape and you lose the highlight at the same time. And the reason I like to do this way rather than wetting the space first, when you wet a space, you're using clear water. You can't always predict how much moisture you're putting down there, so it's a little safer to rinse and soften the edge that on the paint you've just applied. Just about out of color, so I made just about the right amount. I'm going to improvise a little bit here and add in a little bit more, just because I think I could use a few more blobs of snow. large and small. You want to make sure you have a variety in there. Don't just leave it all in the big blobs. All right, so I'm just going to make sure that this is dry before I come in and start adding in my tree underneath the snow. That feels nice and warm. It's kind of cool in here today. All right, so now I want to mix up a really nice dark green here. One of my favorite go-to colors is to take my yellow. Didn't soften up my paint today. Oh, bad me. Take my pipette and soften up some of these colors. Should have done that 10 minutes before I started. I was running a little late today, but I add a significant amount of water so that it will penetrate deep down into the well, not just the top of the paint, but deep down into that paint that's thicker. All right, so lots of water on everything. That should soften things up a little bit. But if I were to take my Payne's Gray, I have to work at it a little bit because I don't have it softened up. And make sure my brush is nice and clean when I go into my yellow. This is an Aureolin yellow, a nice sort of cool yellow. So whatever you have that's a cool yellow, you can help make it into your green. Payne's Gray and pretty much any yellow will give you a nice green. Just experiment and see what you have that you like. And more Payne's Gray, the darker it gets. So that's given me a nice sort of dark green. And I want to kind of spread out my bristles a little bit. Because and you can see what I'm doing with my brush. I'm kind of sort of twisting it in my hand and it's splaying out the bristles. You can see that they're splayed out a little bit. And that can give me a really nice sort of feeling of the little needles. And I'm basically going to tuck this underneath all of the blobs of snow. And there will be, of course, a few that will extend out from there. But that whole splaying of my bristles gives me the idea of those being, little. And you can see instantly that as soon as I put in this really dark color next to that, it doesn't seem nearly so, the snow doesn't seem so dark. Everything's relative in watercolor. So, of course, once you put something dark in, the rest seems light by comparison. And that's just kind of inside the tree, so that's kind of filled in. And, there might be a few other areas where it's sort of filled in. But one thing I want to point out here is that the snow is on top. All right? That sounds kind of obvious, but the snow's on top, and the little needles and things like that have to go underneath the blobs of snow. Don't go putting them off to the side and things like that. So put it underneath the snow first. Then if you have any other little areas that you think could be filled in with the greenery, go ahead and do it at that point. But don't do it until you've got a little bit of the pine needles, or this might be a spruce tree, I guess, underneath the snow first. And so I'm kind of touching it in rather than stroking in a branch. When you touch it in and your bristles are kind of splayed like this, it gives you a much more sort of natural looking tree branch. It's sometimes hard to do natural when you're using the point of your brush. It's amazing that certain techniques can give you something a little bit more convincing. underneath the branches. And the top of the snow, for the most part, I'm trying to keep the top of the snow nice and smooth. So for example, right here, I've got this mound of snow is behind this one. This one's in front. So I need to show the roundness of the top of that snow. So I'm being very careful. As I work certain areas, I'm being very careful to keep the top of the snow sort of rounded like that, because that's really important to keep that rounded looking. All right, let's get a little bit more tucked underneath some of this. And you can see it starting to come together as we start to put in some of this greenery. It starts to look a little bit more convincing, certainly a lot more convincing than just leaving the white of the paper. And you can see the difference between that sort of graphic idea of doing the snow and actually giving it some shadow and form, things like that. It can look really, really nice. As I'm splaying my bristle, I'm trying to make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush. If I have too much, it kind of fills in. Can't splay the bristles properly. So it may not be your brush. It might be just you have too much going on in your brush. You want to be able to look at it, make sure that the bristles are a little bit splayed before you go to your, there, it's nice and splayed, right? So synthetic brushes, it's much harder to do this with because the synthetic brushes tend to fall back into their original form. They kind of hold their shape a little bit more. But natural hair brushes, this is a squirrel hair brush, this will separate and stay separated. And I could never see the use for this type of a brush when I was learning watercolor. I thought, oh my gosh, these are terrible brushes. It just, you know, the bristles don't stay together and everything else. What good are these? And now I know that they're really good for this type of thing. So splaying the bristles can really give you that really natural look. So again, I'm coming underneath all the branches here. They're all under the snow, the blobs of snow. This is a pretty heavily laden tree, so, you know, it's just after a new snowfall. Sometimes you just get little bits on the tree. I think when you have those sort of like light snowfalls and you have just maybe a little bit of snow on the tree, you probably could get away with using the white paint type of thing. But when the tree is mostly covered in snow, I really do feel like it looks a lot more natural to have the brush like this and to put the shading on the snow and so on, because the snow is the main feature here, right? It's not the tree. It seems to be the snow. So I really have to get up on the tiptoe of my brush to fit into some of these places. I have to look how my bristles are splayed. When they're splayed apart like this, sometimes I just have to use the tip. But it will do a good job giving me that bristly look. And remember which blobs of snow are in front, you know, right? These ones in front can overlap these ones, but the top edge of the snow here needed to be round. So I'm not just putting it in sort of random and without any thought. I am thinking about it as I'm going along. Right. Have to have a branch attaching those, don't we? We haven't really had any snow locally yet. It's coming though. It'll come. When you live in southern Ontario, this is inevitable. So I know you're not all in snowy countries, or it may not, if you're in Australia, for example, you probably don't see a lot of snow like this. But be interesting to see, I think, Christmas cards from different countries to see, sort of what, because everybody paints locally and do things that are having things that are familiar, that sort of thing. Don't I damage my expensive brush pushing it in the paint like that? No, I'm actually not pushing it in the paint. I'm just sort of twisting, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure on my brush. I'm just spreading out the bristles. So it's this type of brush, right? And if I spread out the bristles like that, I don't think that's really causing any damage. I've not had any problems with this. But, if you're, and these really, these aren't expensive brushes. It's a natural hair brush, but they're pretty inexpensive. And if you want to know what my usual materials are, including these brushes, there's a list on my website, which is right here, shelleypryor.com. And there's a page called Materials, and you can look at the materials that I've purchased. Fur trade. You could be baking pumpkin pies. All right. So I'm coming in here, just getting some more of the last bits of greenery on this tree. And of course, it will have a stem. Do I need to do the stem in brown? I could do it in green. I think that would be fine. They very often have bristles or needles on the stem too, especially these little saplings. Okay, so I'm coming in now to fill in a little bit in the middle area here. Some of these places in the center of the branches. I'm not filling them in solid either. I'm trying to give the idea that there's still some needle texture in there, so I'm allowing for that. I've got this one I added in here, and I didn't put any greenery under it. There we go. And don't leave any of the branches sort of hanging in midair. You want to make sure that they have something. All right, so our tree is pretty close. I think I would like to come in and shade some of these areas a little bit more. So I'm coming back to my blue for a moment. Dulling it down with a bit of my burnt sienna. And I think I need to build up a few more shadows in a few places. So I'm going to come in and create a little bit more shadow in a couple of places. I'm going to fill in some of these areas. Some of those sort of really white areas that were in the middle. And I'm softening some of these edges here. There we go. Okay, so some of these areas I want to build up a little bit more volume, I guess, in some of the snow. course, this is all just to add more and more dimensionality to these branches. You know, separate the mounds of snow with a little bit of shadow, that type of thing. Blotting and softening a little bit. And put a little bit more in here. Again, it feels like so dark when you put it on, but then you soften it and you let it dry, and it dries so much lighter, and it's not nearly so strong as what it seems like when it's wet. All right, so you can see that that helps a little bit. That starts to make things look not so flat. Which one's in front? This one's in front, so I'm going to put a shadow behind it. I've decided that this one is in front, so that's why I'm putting this shadow behind it. So I can sort of push things back or bring them forward depending on how I shade them. But now with the greenery in there, and I can sort of see the whole tree, I can actually see how, you know, how the tree is formed. So I can come in and shade appropriately. I made this one really come forward in front by shading that one down a little bit more. And another thing that we haven't really done yet, and that is to plant the tree in the snow, because right now it looks okay, but it's actually making quite a bit, all that snow and those branches are making quite a bit of shadow on the ground underneath. So I'm going to take some of this snow color that I've mixed up, this cobalt blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, right? Make a duller blue-gray kind of color. And I want to come in and really darken down. Now this is going to be darker than some of my shadows. And my brush is pretty wet, because what I want to do here is create the shadow, but I may want to soften some things too. So I'm going to tuck in under here. There's something that comes out here. I'm going to get right up underneath, and I want to make sure this is darker than what I had on my tree, that this is kind of like the darkest of the snow shadows. Let's come in here. Now, as shadows come away from something, they get softer. So I'm going to take a clean blotted brush, and I'm going to walk up to it from way over here. Way over here, I'm going to walk up to this, and as soon as I hit it, that'll soften. I'm going to walk up to it from here. And this is a damp brush here, and this will all soften, and I can get that to just blend right out. So now we have our tree sort of planted, but I think I need to dry this so it doesn't look quite so bright blue. You can see as it dries, it loses a lot of that brilliance. All right, so I kind of like that. I think if I'm going to do any stuff in the background, and I do find this one quite busy in the background, I definitely would simplify this. I did put the reference picture under this link on my Facebook page, Shelley Pryor Fine Art on Facebook, and it is under the link for this video that we're doing right now. And but I definitely want to simplify this background. I find it just far too busy and too much going on. So I think what I'd like to do is maybe just put the suggestion of some trees back here. Okay, so that's what I'm decided I'm going to do. I'm going to take my cobalt blue and my burnt sienna, a little more burnt sienna this time because I want to push things back. I want things to look duller. So I don't want to make it a complete gray, but I want to make it a duller gray. All right, so what I'm going to do is come right across here. And this is a nice filled up brush here. I'm not trying to do this very dry or anything like that. I need this nice and wet, and I need to paint around my tree, which is going to be a little tricky, but that's why you need it extra wet. You could wet the area first, that it would be an option as well, but I'm going to work on dry because I can get my color darker more easily if I haven't wet my paper. So I'm going to come right across here. And when your paper is nice and wet, or your brush is nice and wet, I should say, the paint will flow together as you're putting it down. If your brush is too dry, you're going to have dry patches. But I'm just going to put this in here, just like a sort of a distant woodland. Not too distant, but definitely more like a little further back, for example. And what this will also do is it's going to really emphasize how bright the snow is going to look, you know, contrast, right? So you can see I'm really deviating from my original picture, but I got the idea of the tree from that one photograph. So not every photograph that you work from is going to be a great photograph, but they may have potential in it, might have something really interesting in it that you can use in your paintings. Make that go up. I don't want it looking too straight. All right, so we've got something in the background there, and maybe if I took some just Payne's gray and blot it, I can suggest some trees back in here. Got to be careful not to drag that through my snow on my tree, which is in the foreground. But I just want sort of the idea of trees and things back in here, so I just put my hand in my paint. But I'm just going to make a little bit of a tangly mess, right? And let the viewer figure it out. I don't have to spell it out. They've got their own imagination. They can make it what they will. I have a telephone solicitor that is very persistent today. Keeps phoning me. All right, now, not everything needs to come to the bottom because we want the woods to look like they go back a little bit. It almost looks like there's kind of a hill here and these trees are in behind. Kind of a scribbly mess, basically. What color would I use for a moonlit scene on the tree? Well, as a matter of fact, I have a moonlit scene, or moonlight trees card version, basically. In last week's video, I think I linked that, but there are links to all my previous videos on my website. I have a page called Free Online Demos. So if you're looking for a specific demonstration that I've done in the past, for example, that you might be able to find it more easily if you just look there on my website. But all right, so I'm going to thin down my color here a little bit, make it maybe a little bit more blue again. And I want to put a little, just the idea of some, mounds and shapes in the snow. So I'm going to come across here and let's soften some of this. So I'm going to soften this edge here, maybe this edge here. Let's bring that across to the other side too. And I'm just making this up, of course. I'm not even really looking at my reference picture anymore. And some of these darks are really kind of helpful. Like if you put shadows in the snow, sometimes it's helpful to emphasize the highlight area of the tree itself. So depending on how you place them, you can actually emphasize the light on the tree by softening that. So this blue, I think, is still a little bit light. Maybe I'll put a little bit more burnt sienna in it. Just to dull it down a little bit. Tuck in a couple of extra darks. You know that the higher the contrast, the more the eye is drawn to certain things. So I can create a little bit more interest there. And I think for my snow-covered tree, that's all I need to do. Now let's just have a quick discussion. I won't demonstrate this one, but let's have a quick discussion about this one. This would be very similar. Of course, you'd put your highlights in your sky and everything, but the sky in this case, because it's late in the day and the sun is setting, I'm basically looking at the sun. And actually, this was morning. Now that I remember, it was morning. And so the sun was coming up, and these trees are most definitely dark. And to come into that kind of dark, you would need to, let me just show you on the paper here, you would need to do those trees sort of that dark in order for them to show up properly. But in order to make some shape to them, you would also need a little bit of form. Not as much, because when you're looking at the sun, looking into the sun, anything between you and the sun is going to be silhouetted because you've got the light sources from behind. But this too could be a very nice approach. So don't assume that all snow is nice and bright and white. It's not. It's quite, it can be quite interesting to do it any which way. So I might do another version of that. Maybe, I don't know if I'll do it next week or anything like that, but I'll probably do a version similar to this at some point. But I wanted to show you the contrast the difference between painting a tree like this and a tree like this. This was, I believe, the same snowfall. I'm trying to remember the day, but this was, I believe, the same snowfall. And it's a different type of tree. So the branches are angling up on this one, whereas this one, it's the small sapling, the tree, the limbs are weaker, so that it's weighing it down. But they could actually be the same type of tree. I'm not sure. It was so covered in snow, who would know? But anyway, that's my snow-covered tree. Think about starting with the snow. Instead of starting with the tree, try starting with the snow. I think you'll find the process a little bit easier to manage. So anyway, enjoy your week, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, by all means, give me a thumbs up or subscribe. And if you appreciate my videos, there's also the super thanks. Appreciate you. See you next week. Bye.